All right, well, let's just get started with some introductions and get ready to go. It's so good to see everybody here today. I'm Brent Never, and I am director of the Midwest Center for Nonprofit Leadership. I see a lot of familiar faces on here, and really happy to see you all again. And then some people new to the sessions, and that's absolutely great and welcome. Very happy to have you guys here. So today we're going to talk about um, the strategic plan is dead, long live scenario planning. So I say that sort of tongue in cheek because actually here at the Midwest Center, we do a lot of strategic plans for nonprofits. And we absolutely love it. It's a wonderful experience. That being said, we live in interesting times. So there's that Chinese proverb that says, "May you live in interesting times." And every year I think, gosh, this is really interesting right now. I'd rather it be a little more boring. And then every year it gets a little more interesting. So I think we're all there. And so I think planning is very much of the time and help to make sense of the interesting moments that we have right now. Okay. So first off, I do want to give you a heads up on some of our upcoming events. As always, you can go to our website and that's where you registered for this. So it's mcnl.org. But coming up, we have Dave Renz who will be doing his Essentials of Effective Board Service. So for those of you who have boards. Maybe you have new members on your board. This is a great class for those folks to get a sense of what board service means, what you do. And so this is occurring at the end of March and then 3 days in April. Um, Also, we have our fundraising tools series. Fundraising tools is really meant for folks who are dipping their feet into new sorts of areas that they haven't really thought of before. So maybe it's a new professional who is getting interested in fundraising, and those occur again end of March through April. And we have a rotating series. This is just the next few. But always keep your eyes on that. And then lastly, next month, at the end of the month, February 28th, we're going to have our legislative update. So last year we had a series of government relations professionals come in. They go to Topeka and Jeff City for their lives. And they will be back at the end of February. And I think that sort of goes with the theme for today, which is, know what's going on in your environment. And so absolutely, please look for the legislative update coming up. We'd love to have you. All right. So let's get started for today. Um, so let's talk a little bit about strategic planning. I imagine that many, if not all of you, have been through strategic planning before. And it's something that some people roll their eyes when they think about, oh, we have to go through, you say a retreat, and people automatically start rolling their eyes. But it is something that I think is really important. So, it's this episodic process where every certain amount of time, we have this magical sort of like 3 years, 5 years. We have these dates that we find to be really important. But there's this certain amount of time where you get people together. I call it big tent thinking. So you get people back under the tent. You bring them all together. You get stakeholders who may not have been there previously to bring forward their thoughts and their ideas. And to really start to think about what is the world going to look like in the next 3 to 5 years? And then how are we going to change our organization to fit that world in the next 3 to 5 years? So 3 to 5 years seems really quaint right now because I'll tell you what, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And I think maybe some of you live in that world where it's not very clear what might happen um, tomorrow. So, I also say about strategic planning is then you put in that three-ring binder. We still have them. I call them top shelf strategic plans. You go into an ED or CEO's office and they're all up there on the top shelf. Unfortunately for many organizations, they never come down. But that tends to be uh, how we traditionally think of strategic planning. Let me back up one step here. So I opened up the New York Times this morning. I don't know, I'm sure it was on CNN or wherever you get your news. But yesterday, the Office of Management and Budget in Washington, D.C., and I'm a political scientist, so I follow this stuff, put out new guidance saying that they're going to halt all federal grants and loans um, starting immediately. And so if you have a grant or loan from the federal government, there's a good chance. Now, there wasn't a lot of flesh on the bones. It was only a couple page memo. So there's a potential that you may be in that group. There's potential, maybe not. We don't really know. Um, but even if it's a pass through the state, so say you have a state grant, also this is going to be held up. So everything going to states that then get passed through to nonprofits. So this is very much, again, of the moment, and we want to think about this. So if this happened and you have your strategic plan that you did 3 months ago and you painstakingly went through this would sort of blow up a strategic plan. All right. So let's talk about it. We have some assumptions about strategic planning. One is that the world changes in somewhat predictable ways, right? So we ask people to sit down and say, okay, I serve children. I think that, the need for serving children is going to be there over the next 3 to 5 years. I think that the state might increase our funding by 2% a year over the next 3 years. And, let's go from those sort of assumptions. We assume we have ample data about the world. So we've been getting this state funding for the past 10 years. It's been a 2% increase every single year for the past 10 years. So let's use that inference. Um, and then you think, well, we'll get a small group of people. I actually like to think about a large group of people, frankly, but a group of people around to talk about where we can go, what are our choices over that amount of time. And then sort of like Moses coming off down with the tablets, you come down with your strategic plan and you give it to your staff and you present it to them. Now, I don't think that's an ideal system. I'll be absolutely honest. I, again, think strategic planning should be very democratic at key points. All right. But, the last 18 months have been disruptive. And it's funny because I teach this in class, and this slide is actually from my COVID years, and so I was responding to the 18 months of COVID. But you can just say the same thing for right now. So it has been fairly head scratching in the last 18 months, not to speak of the last 2 months. So, those assumptions are pretty incorrect about the world that we had, that you have data about the world. For example, I think a lot of us were planning on big changes coming from the federal government. So that was something that we all knew would happen. And we all knew that perhaps funding would go down over a certain amount of time. Um, but I think how rapidly this has changed, I think very few people, at least myself, I certainly didn't see that happening. So we need to think about, the fact is that our data is not necessarily as good as it used to be. But we still have valuable data about our clients, our families, the people we serve. Um, we still understand some historical trends. So really, this process is sifting out the important stuff from the unimportant stuff. Um, so we need to start thinking more contingently, which is if X happens, then we'll do Y. So instead of having this nice planned out chart of the next 3 years of what we'll do, let's think about having 3 paths going forward, 4 paths going forward, and let's put some probabilities on that. So there's a 50% chance that this might happen, and then there's a 20% chance that that might happen, so that you're moving down the road and you're able to plan accordingly. So that's enough of me sort of talking. So now we're going to actually work scenario planning. All right. So I know my colleague Mark Culver sent out an email with the materials, but if you don't have them, Cindy is going to put them right there in the chat. So you can click on those and you can grab them. And I encourage you to work through this with me. I'm going to do a couple of examples first, and then you guys are going to start working on it. All right. So this is very much a workshop type navigation. Okay, so first, I want to say that this is from the Bridge Band group. I did not come up with this. I think this is a wonderful tool. It's free and open access, so they've given access to the whole wide world to use this tool. Just very quickly, the Bridge Band group is a big national consultancy. We've worked with some of their partners before. And so they put this out during COVID, but I think, again, this is very applicable for today. And I encourage you all to use this with your staff, with your board, and the like. All right. So we're going to work an example for the Block School of Management. So we're going to do that because I thought, well, I should pick the symphony, or I should pick the ballet, or I should pick and then I thought, let's not pick somebody else's organization. Let's keep it safe right now. So just so you know, the Block School is a fairly big organization. We operate often like a nonprofit. We have a fairly sizable endowment that's cut up into 300 restricted funds. So we have a lot of restriction on our monies. We also get a significant state allocation. And then we are fee for service. So for those of you who went to college, fee for service. We charge tuition. So just to sort of level set for you guys to understand what I'm talking about. All right, so here's how we're going to do it. It's a 4-step process, and it really is pretty intuitive. I think step one is perhaps the most challenging. So if you get that one all set, you should be good, and then we can go from there. So step one, just overarchingly, you identify the key drivers of your money and your mission. So, we're highly reliant on donor funds for our scholarships and chairs. We're somewhat reliant on state funds for our, financial well-being, and then tuition funds. So those
Okay.
are our economic drivers. So we talk about risk there. Then we'll move to some scenarios. So what could happen? We could say, well, we could lose 5% of our state funding next year. We could increase tuition by 5%. So you sort of lay out, all right, here are the different scenarios, things that that could happen to us. Um, then you create a portfolio of actions. These are things that we can do in response to what happens to us. So, this is very top of mind. I run the budget and finance for the block school. And so we are actually doing these contingencies like you all are. So if the state of Missouri cuts our funds by X amount, the block school, we're going to move money from here to there. We're going to leverage this fund or that fund in order to deal with it. And then lastly, we determine trigger points. And this is probably the most important part as a leader in your organization, whether you're leading a program or you're leading the organization itself or a department. At what point do you pull the trigger on those actions? So at what point do you say, okay, we need to furlough employees, which would be something you don't want to do. Or, okay, we need to, talk about holding PTO days for the next 2 months, whatever that might be. So that's scenario planning in a nutshell. So let's work this example. All right. So here's the example put forth by Bridgespan, but I think it sort of works for the block school. So in those scenario planning documents that Cindy put in the chat, you have a fillable form, so you can just fill these out, and I think it's a wonderful tool. But what you want to think about are what are our drivers for programs, for operations, and for funding. So those are the three big buckets. Of course, if you have a slightly different organization, you can create a different bucket. These are not necessarily magical. But for programs, what are the drivers of your impact? So at the block school, our drivers of impact, being a university, are probably high quality, well-trained faculty. So that might be an important driver of impact. We might think about, we spend a lot of time on mentorship here. We have a very strong mentoring program with our students. Also, Bridgespan has here how services are delivered, very much applicable for the block school. Should be online, should be on ground, should be something else. So those are our drivers of program impact. Then we think about operations. These are the choices that you need to make around getting things done. So if you have a strong mentor program, can you still recruit those mentors? Can you train them up? For us, it goes for faculty. Can we train up our faculty? Remember during COVID when we all sort of shut down for however many weeks or months it was, these were real questions. Can we still do this function and doing what we need to do? Also in operations, though, you handle a lot of administrative stuff. Can we pay our lease? Can we fix the HVAC because it's on its last legs? Things about utilities, things about the cost of your office, whatever it might be. And then lastly, the funding. So, you have to pay for your mission. This is the money bucket. So what drives your revenue? Here at the block school, it's tuition. So tuition covers 60% of our revenue. Then we have endowment that covers 30%. And then we have a further 10%, which is special events. All right. So you will certainly have a different mix. Some of it may be foundation, some of it may be state, some of it may be federal, some of it may be earned income. Um, but you list these all out. All right. Let me take a moment to pause. And does anybody have a question about what a driver would be?
Should we raise our hands or just pop on?
How about pop on, Raleigh? Go for it.
So I was trying to think of the drivers of our programmatic impact. We're a victim services organization,
Mhm.
and my go-to thought was something like our case managers, or individuals providing that kind of impactful uh, service to our client population. And then when I got to drivers of organization operation, I guess maybe operational staff capacity might be things like administrative. So I guess
Yeah.
my the maybe I've just answered my question, but the puzzle I was feeling was how to when a driver of programmatic impact is an impactful staff person, how do we decide between whether that's programmatic impact or organizational impact, or does that matter, or operational impact, and does that matter?
Yeah, yeah, and that's an excellent point. And here's kind of the real point, which in my mind, it doesn't matter what bucket you put it in. I think it just matters that it's in there somewhere. But that's a good question. But yeah, I tend to think of operations as administrative type.
So individuals providing direct service or mechanisms by which we provide direct service, that's really what programmatic is getting at.
Yeah, that's the way I would think about it. Yep, absolutely. Yep, good question. Any other questions about drivers? Okay. All right. So feel free to throw it in the chat. Cindy is keeping track of this also, and we can circle back, no problem. So once you do that, then we have these two columns. So the level of importance and the level of risk. And these are a couple different categories. Level of importance is just what it means, which is how important is this thing to what you do. So at the block school, for example, highly trained faculty that is very important to us. That's kind of how we deliver our mission. So if we're in a really bad spot and we had 20% of our faculty, highly trained faculty leave, that would really affect our ability to to meet our mission. So think about what affects your mission for programs, your administration for operations, and your money for funding. All right, Janelle. So so for an organization that has significant capital expenditures, could you delineate drivers into capital expenses and operating expenses? Absolutely, Janelle. Yep. So I think that's right. So let's use the university as an example. If you had research labs that have significant capital expenditures, you would pull that out and speak to that. And for those of you in the nonprofit sector, you have a facility, say you run a charter school, capital expenditures are very much important to pull out. So that's level of importance. Not everything should be high. Some things could be medium and low. And then level of risk is really where it's at today, which is if this important thing were to change, or what's the likelihood that that important thing will change? So what's the risk if that were to change? So for us at the block school, what would happen if highly trained faculty, what's the risk that they'll leave? And what I would say right now is we have competitive salaries, so the risk is somewhat medium or low. But if you think about what could happen if state funding were significantly cut, that might be more medium to high. So you need to sort of think about not necessarily the world today, but what is the world going to look like, say, in the near term or the medium term? All right. So what's the risk of something happening? And that's really the important thing going on. Um, Let's see here. So a question, should scenario planning also include optimistic scenarios? I love it. Glass half full. And for some of us, I think that's really important. So let's use the example of the Kauffman Foundation. You could be a glass half empty or glass half full, depending on how you look at it. But they had their strategic refresh. They have new ideas about what could happen. You could really very much say, what would happen if we landed that new grant, that lends itself to $1.6 million over the next 3 years. So that I think is very much important to also think about. So we develop and model our scenarios. So we look at the drivers that we found to be most important. So remember in the previous slide, we identified some highly important drivers. So in step two, we pull those forward and start talking about those. So um, we can think about what are some factors, external factors that are impacting our organization. Um, so in the COVID sense, they were talking about pace of economic recovery. They were talking about closing down schools, but also we were talking about closing down our offices wherever we were. Um, in today's environment, we might think of impacts coming from the federal government, maybe from our state governments. We may think about changing funding environment that could be positive also. So, Kauffman Foundation, say you're in workforce development, that is a new key bucket for Kauffman Foundation. So you would definitely say Kauffman Foundation finds our mission persuasive in workforce development. And then you lay out what's the best case scenario for what could happen, moderate case and worst case. So for a best case scenario for, say, government funding in the state of Missouri might be level funding. Best case is we're sort of held harmless in this political environment right now. Moderate case might be, well, revenues are slowing down in the state of Missouri. So moderate case might be a 2% cut in our state revenues. But worst case might be this is important and you should plan for, say, a 10% cut, which has happened at UMKC in the past decade. So that's the way you would lay it out. Now, if you move to the bottom part, which is thinking about your very important drivers, what's the best case, moderate case, and worst case for each of those drivers? And so this is where you get more granular to your particular organization. So one of the important things that I always think about is that we have agency. So, stuff happens to our organizations, but also we have the ability to create the future for our programs, for our organizations. And so what the action part is, I think, is really empowering. What I would say is this is where staff should be very involved, which is thinking about how do we be proactive about what might be coming down the pike. And that really gets you out of that reactive mindset of, oh my God, doom and gloom is going to happen, to, hey, we're great at what we do. We know our context. We know what we're our clients, our families, and here's what we're going to do proactively. Um, Sometimes that involves painful discussions, though. So sometimes you're going to have to put on the table salary and compensation. In the nonprofit sector, often our biggest expense is people. So, I think the more upfront we all are with our staff, the more likely it is to have a productive and real discussion and not a fearful one. Uh, so they break it down into things that are appropriate for any scenario. So, certainly appropriate for any scenario right now is to be considering your levers when it comes to compensation. So those levers can be anything from adjusting, again, paid time off. It might be levers around benefits. So if you have the ability to renegotiate your benefit with your benefits provider, that might be a lever right now. But these are times to start to think about what levers would be appropriate no matter what happens. Smaller scale and more flexible levers. So flexible is really, you know, thinking about the amount of people's compensation. So it's not good, it's not easy, but you can think about a 2% decrease in compensation, a 3%, a 4%. So it's flexible in that sense, not necessarily a good thing. Um, and you can think about how that would apply to moderate cases and worst cases. But then you have to think about, well, what are sort of more permanent changes? And hence, what we're trying to do is an order of operations. So we want to do the things appropriate for any scenario, no matter what, you know. Then the smaller scale or more flexible ones are next in line. The larger, more important ones are the ones that you have to be very thoughtful about. So laying off staff, that's a pretty permanent sort of situation. So walking away from federal grants because the headache isn't worth it. Well, that's a pretty, now it might not be as permanent as laying off staff because you could revisit that in a few years, but that is a fairly fundamental shift. All right, so think about your actions and kind of layering the easiest to the most difficult. All right. Um, and Janelle, I'll get to your question. It's an excellent one in just a second. Uh, Step number 4 is determining your trigger points. In this, as a leader of an organization or of a program and program staff, this really helps you in uh, sort of binding you to a decision that is a hard one. So to say, hey, when we reach, so let's just use the example of the federal government pausing disbursement of grants and loans right now. So you could have a trigger point that says if we get to April 1 and they still have not disbursed our major grant, I will do this action. If we get to end of our fiscal year, June 30, and still it hasn't been dispersed, I will do that action. And this sort of rubric here, I would certainly support or share with my executive committee, with my board. Not because they should be involved in operations, but they should be cognizant that it's important that we have this planned out, especially with the more fundamental changes. All right. So Janelle, this is a really good question. So Janelle's question, how do you create a portfolio of actions that is realistic, where human capital is concerned, but not alarmist, where you have folks looking for another job? Would this document be public? Does this create confidence or fear? I'm a realist, and so I think it could very much create
So,
confidence and fear. Um, but what I would say is um, the first couple of steps I think are very good for a broader discussion. So this step number one, I would imagine being a discussion amongst your senior staff, people who understand administration, people who understand the programs that you're running, the funding structure, so your development director, for example. Um, Step number two, I think, is one that I would involve a slightly bigger group of folks to start to understand, well, what could happen. So that's program staff, for example, program staff who work with the state and, hey, I heard the deputy director of this state agency said that, don't look for any increases this year. I mean, that's good information that people have. Um, and certainly I think step number three is the most empowering step. Now it is difficult and but I do think the more you empower staff to think about what could happen, the better off everybody is. And I would definitely um, empower them to think about this, to give them good information about what could be out there. And Janelle, to be absolutely honest, could people start heading for the hills, looking for other positions? That could happen, but I would rather have my staff understand that we are being thoughtful and that we want everybody involved than one where there's this secret little document that people whisper about in the back room. Um, and lastly, step number four, I do think is more appropriate just for a small group of the executive team and for your board to also understand um, where you are on these sort of decision points. Let me stop right now. Are there questions throughout? And how about you just raise your hand in Zoom and then I can call on you. Right. Well, if we're good, we're good. So here's what I want us to do now. All right. So we're going to throw you into a breakout room. You have the bridgeband document. And what I want you all to do is to take 10 minutes. So we would come back at 9:20 and for you to work through an example, whether it's one of your organizations, if you feel confident. If not, just pick an organization in town that you all know enough about to work this document. All right. So let's go ahead, Cindy, open up the groups, and we'll come back at 9:20 to review. I hope you guys were able to work a real example. Are there any questions? Sometimes when you actually do it, you end up having questions of like, oh, I didn't really understand this thing. Any questions? If not,
I
throw 'em
think
in
I think if that was 20 minutes, I'm in like some weird time warp. Was that 20
10
minutes?
minutes. 10 minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, we just had started it. So, but it was super helpful for discussion. Yeah.
Good, good, good.
I think for me,
Um,
the only question was kind of like where to put staff because it's sort of like operations or programs, but and maybe it's both, but
Yeah,
I mean,
Sonia, I think, well, I think this is one where it actually, that's a really good distinction. So if you're looking back at step number one, um, what I would say is programmatic staff in programs, and then administrative staff in operations. And why do I say it? Because um, let's do glass half full. I'm sick of being glass half empty. All right. So let's do glass half full, which is, hey, we land this really big grant from this funder. We feel really good about it. There's a pretty good chance this might happen. That might have implications certainly on the programmatic side. So you're able to build out this whole new program that you guys are really excited about. But also it might mean we have to hire an accountant to handle all the finances. We may have to hire an evaluator, and those might go in the operations side. So separating those out gives you more options for if something were to happen. Um, yeah. Does that help, Sonia? All right. I saw another hand up also. All right.
I had my hand up. In our group, there was a question about how this might be utilized alongside of strategic planning.
Yeah.
And are there any good examples of where you do both versus one or the other?
Excellent question. In fact, that's where I wanted to sort of end today. And so don't throw away your strategic plans. Please don't. The title of this was to be slightly tongue in cheek. What we want to have you do is to still very much plan for the next 2, 3, 4 years, whatever that time period is. But these should work in tandem. So if you think about a strategic plan is the longer term. A scenario planning is a tool for the next, I would say, 6 to 9 months. So this is a nearer term way of thinking about the world. Um, and it should feed back into your strategic plan. So strategic plan should not be static. Once it gets printed and put in that 3-ring binder, we don't touch it. That's actually not the ethos you should have, which is you go through this scenario planning, things change over the next 6 months, and we're able to adjust our strategic plan so that it lives with us over the next 3 to 5 years. So they very much should be hooked at the hip. Good question, Rochelle. Any other questions? All right. So what I will say is, first off, this is a great set of tools that the Bridgespan Group put out. I hope that you keep them, share them with colleagues and friends. I might say if you have a working board, I would think the board should be involved, but I don't think this might be something that if you are an organization with staff, that you would sit down with the board and do this, because I do fear that each of these steps could get a board sort of in minutia. They certainly should understand the big picture. Alex, you have a question.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really timely today, but I'm wondering maybe some advice. The news today is unprecedented and I think totally unanticipated. I don't think anyone could have created a scenario plan for this.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess from your perspective, Brent, how do we move forward with the unimaginable? What type of scenario planning do we do for the comet that falls?
Yeah, that's a good point, right? Yeah, yeah. Well, if that one were to happen, Alex, I think everything's
Well,
out the window.
I'm using an exaggerated
I know,
analogy,
I
but
know.
that's what,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
what
yeah.
that's where we are. at this moment today. It might pass, you know,
Yeah, right.
it might pass tomorrow, but
Yeah. What,
it
you know,
does
what
send a warning bell.
I think there's two answers to that. I think you're absolutely right, Alex. So one answer is we should have this as a tool that, again, is sort of in our back pocket that we leverage often. So it's not just when something hits the news and it's crazy and oh my God. It's let's see. All right. There's a new funding call from the Hall Family Foundation, and let's pull this scenario planning out, and let's think about what are the implications if we were to get that grant or if we weren't able to get that grant. Um, so I think that would be, this is a tool that should be leveraged on a fairly routine basis as that comment is coming towards you, as you get a little more clarity. Also, as you get more clarity, your level of risk changes because you're more certain about, is this a risk or is it not? And so updating this as information comes in is really important. Um, and so excellent question, Alex. I think there's always a category that you can put in here around funding of what happens if I lose X funding. You know, it doesn't have to be tied to a person or to a donor or to a government agency, and you could think about that. Um, any other questions? If, if not, yeah, we'll share the slideshow so everybody will get access to the slides. Um, and so please fill out the feedback as Mark just popped in the chat. We're here to help. So if you have a question, if you just want to contact me, I'm very happy to workshop with you and to think about what's going on. I'm sorry that this got sort of glass half empty based on the news this morning. But what I do want to say is this is a normal tool for normal events also, not for the comet or asteroid coming for you. And so please do pull it out and share it around and start those conversations. So with that, loved having you here. Look forward to seeing you at a future Midwest Center event.